Now, the Prime Minister has already stated that Canada won't accept a, quote, bad deal, even though concessions and border measures taken so far up, and Canadian counter-tariffs are still on the table.
But I would look to see something Arctic-specific in the budget. We might want to look at some of our first major projects being done in the Arctic.
While the world watches Washington's flurry of trade deals, something quieter, but potentially more lasting, is happening in Canada. As Trump courts new partners in Asia, Canada is turning to the Arctic, building economic resilience and forging powerful alliances with Indigenous communities. It's not just a policy shift, it's a strategic reset. Let's take a closer look at how Trump sidelined Canada, and how Canada is pushing back. Since returning to office, President Trump has pursued a transactional approach to global trade. In July alone, his administration has announced new deals or frameworks with Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and the United Kingdom. These agreements are fast, headline-friendly, and focused on slashing tariffs, sometimes down to 10 or 15%. But Canada isn't part of that club. Despite being America's largest export market and closest neighbor, Canada has been left out. Trump's logic? Canada already has a deal, CUSMA, formerly known as USMCA. According to U.S. officials, that agreement includes carve-outs, so Canada shouldn't expect further concessions. In fact, the opposite is happening. On March 4th, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods, and by June, steel and aluminum tariffs were raised to 50%. Now, he's threatening a sweeping 35% tariff by August 1st, unless Canada agrees to more U.S. market access. Washington calls it a reciprocal tariff, but to many in Ottawa, it feels like targeted punishment.
And what a great place. It has economic development potential, but there's defense importance, strategic defense, Arctic bases, other dual-use potential projects to roll out, and it sounds like willing partners potentially all around.
While Canada has responded with counter-tariffs, reindustrialization, and a quiet consumer boycott of American goods, its most strategic move may be the one few are talking about. Canada is opening a new front, the Arctic. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada has launched a sweeping northern strategy, centered on Indigenous partnership, sovereignty, and strategic infrastructure. In July, Parliament passed Bill C-5 to fast-track development in Inuit regions. What makes this unique isn't just the scale of the investment, it's who's leading it. Canada has appointed an Arctic ambassador from the Inuit community. It has opened new consulates in Anchorage and Greenland, and pledged over $6 billion Canadian dollars for radar systems, transport corridors, and northern energy projects. These initiatives are being developed with direct leadership from Inuit organizations, building both trust and long-term capacity. But this isn't just a domestic agenda, it's a strategic signal to Washington. By investing heavily in the Arctic, Canada is positioning itself as the democratic anchor in a region where Russia is militarizing and China is actively expanding influence. At the same time, it's quietly challenging America's assumption of uncontested dominance in North American defense. And this goes far beyond geopolitics. The Arctic holds vast reserves of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, the raw materials essential for electric vehicles, advanced electronics, and modern weapon systems. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, as of 2024, the United States still sourced over 90% of its rare earth imports from China. Canada's new approach, working directly with Inuit communities under constitutionally protected agreements, means control over these resources won't be dictated by external pressure. Any future U.S. access to Arctic supply chains will require trust, cooperation, and respect for Indigenous governance. If Trump believed tariffs were the only leverage, he may have miscalculated. While the White House focuses on short-term wins, Canada is securing long-term power in territory, in resources, and in its relationships. And if Washington doesn't recalibrate, it risks being locked out of both Arctic diplomacy and the mineral supply chains it desperately needs. Trump may have assumed Canada had no other options, that it would wait in line for a new deal. But Canada is writing its own script. While some countries are chasing U.S. approval, Canada is building internal strength, defending its industries, rebalancing trade, and forming deep alliances with its own people.
But I just signed the largest trade deal in history, I think maybe the largest deal in history, with Japan.
Of course, Canada's relationship is far more integrated across the border than Japan's economy is with the United States, but it's still a good, valuable piece of insight.
President Trump just made headlines with what he calls the biggest trade deal in U.S. history. Japan, America's longtime ally, agreed to a 15% tariff on its auto exports to the U.S., down from the 25% that had been threatened earlier this year. In return, Japan pledged a massive $550 billion investment into the U.S. economy, aimed at energy projects, rare earth supply chains, and domestic manufacturing. At first glance, it looks like a classic Trump win. But for trade watchers, and especially Canada, it's something else entirely. The deal with Japan is not the end of a negotiation cycle. It's the opening move in a broader strategy. And now, that strategy is facing resistance.
The Japanese, very close allies with the Americans, and they're going to be hit with a 15% tariff. So are we, and that the president has basically said, look, no country will be exempt from tariffs. We're not going back to 2 or 3%. There will be a baseline of 10 or 15%, even for close allies.
The Japan deal came with terms that raised eyebrows in Ottawa. Despite the flashy investment number, Japan failed to secure the removal of key sectoral tariffs, particularly on steel. Those Section 232 tariffs remain in place, and the 15% auto tariff is still 5 times higher than the rate Japan faced before Trump returned to office in January 2025. For Canada, the implications are serious. If even Japan, with all its leverage, couldn't get a full exemption, then the odds of a no-tariff deal for Canada look slim. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of rushing to follow Japan's lead, Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing a different path, one that signals confidence, not desperation. His government is now shifting from defense to offense. The goal? If the U.S. insists on keeping baseline tariffs, Canada will push to eliminate the sectoral ones on steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos. And if Trump won't move, then Canada is prepared to act on its own terms.
I have no problem, but I don't trust President Trump as far as I can throw him. He constantly changes his mind. It's you just don't know who you're dealing with.
This isn't just a federal effort. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, speaking from Huntsville, put it plainly, Canada buys more from the U.S. than Japan ever will. $349 billion a year, compared to Japan's $79 billion, based on U.S. Census data from 2024. Canada isn't a minor partner. It's the customer that pays the bills. Across the provinces, that sentiment is catching on. From Alberta to Nova Scotia, premiers are pushing for deeper domestic production of steel, clean energy, and critical minerals. There's growing investment in SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, and new energy pipelines that bypass U.S. dependency altogether. Canada's message is simple. If Washington won't ease the pressure, Ottawa and the provinces will make sure Canada no longer needs to ask.
He's our friend, and I don't consider Americans enemy. But right now, President Trump himself is acting like the enemy.
The Trump administration has used tariffs to pressure partners into action. But this time, the strategy might backfire. In recent months, Canada has quietly built economic leverage of its own. Imports of American steel and alcohol are already down. Tourism to the U.S. has fallen by more than 60% since the first round of tariffs in March 2025, according to Statistics Canada. That's not just political protest, it's real economic impact. Now, as Trump promotes the Japan deal as a model for future negotiations, Ottawa is studying it closely, not to copy, but to counter. The logic is clear. If Trump demands concessions to secure investment, Canada can demand fairness in return for access. And if that doesn't happen, Carney's team is preparing for a selective pushback through tariffs, market diversification, and regulatory shifts that affect U.S. companies operating in Canada. Trump's deal with Japan was supposed to set the tone. Instead, it may have triggered a new dynamic. Canada is no longer simply reacting to tariffs. It's rewriting the rules of engagement. Mark Carney isn't chasing a deadline. He's building leverage. And across Canada, premiers are reinforcing that stance, with pipelines, with manufacturing, and with a growing appetite to reduce dependence on U.S. markets. August 1st is the next marker in this negotiation. But for once, it's not just Trump setting the terms. Canada is now playing its own game, and it's doing it with eyes wide open.
Term thing. China's influence on the world stage has been growing and America's has been declining. It seems to have accelerated in the last few months.
Trump's tariffs were supposed to make America stronger. Instead, they've exposed just how much leverage the country has already lost, not only in global trade, but in global leadership.
The numbers for the full year should have gone up. But because of tariffs, companies withdrew their guidance and left to their own devices. Wall Street cut numbers for the full year, expecting tariffs were going to take a big bite out of business.
President Donald Trump returned to office promising to finish what he started: break global trade dependencies, revive American manufacturing, and force allies into reciprocal trade deals. His signature weapon? Tariffs. On April 2nd, what he called Liberation Day, the administration announced sweeping tariffs of 10 to 50% on over 100 countries. Canada faced 35%, the EU 30%, China 50%. But instead of forcing trade partners to fold, the strategy is falling flat. According to Morgan Stanley Investment Management, U.S. companies in Q2 2025 showed stronger than expected earnings. Not because tariffs helped, but because Wall Street had slashed expectations too sharply earlier in the year. Companies had withdrawn guidance out of caution, assuming tariffs would bite deep. But those fears didn't fully materialize. What did happen? Supply chains rerouted, costs shifted, and a wave of confusion left investors cautious. Tariffs didn't crash the markets, but they didn't boost domestic production either. Industrial growth remains sluggish. Input prices have edged up. The economic logic behind Trump's strategy is now under serious scrutiny.
I think that's right, Ali. Exactly right. I think if you were to look back at public opinion polling from the first Trump administration, you would also have seen the gap close between the United States and China on the global stage.
Well, China is the world's largest producer of steel, of aluminum. They produce 2/3 of the world's electric vehicles.
While the economic results remain mixed, the geopolitical cost is becoming crystal clear. Longtime allies are walking away, not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. European officials now describe the U.S. as an unreliable partner. Trade talks with the EU have stalled. Japan and South Korea are signing independent energy deals with Canada, bypassing Washington. What's more, Trump's foreign policy choices, cutting USAID funding, slashing international education programs, and walking back diversity initiatives in universities, have eaten into America's soft power. According to Freedom House, the number of democracies worldwide has declined for 19 straight years. Trump didn't start that trend, but analysts say he's accelerating it. U.S. influence used to come not only from the dollar or the Pentagon, but from trust. That trust is eroding, and nothing is replacing it. As Washington raises walls, others are building bridges. China, once hesitant, now responds with full confidence. In April, Beijing imposed retaliatory tariffs as high as 84% on U.S. goods. It restricted rare earth exports, tightened import licenses, and deepened Belt and Road investments. Over $1 trillion has been pledged across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, with little U.S. competition in sight. Even more striking is Canada's response. After being hit with 35% tariffs, Ottawa didn't just retaliate with its own 25% levies. It went further. Prime Minister Mark Carney launched an economic realignment strategy, boosting trade with Mexico and the EU, slashing exposure to U.S. supply chains, and coordinating regional alternatives. Tourism from Canada to the U.S. dropped over 40% in June, according to international booking platforms. Some provinces banned American alcohol from public events, and Canadian consumers, quietly, began choosing differently. Trump's tariff-first doctrine was designed to project power. But in practice, it's revealed a painful truth. Power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from being needed. And in 2025, more nations are showing they can walk away. China is no longer waiting for U.S. permission. Canada is no longer asking for exemptions. Allies are looking elsewhere, and they're finding options. What Trump promised as strength is starting to look like isolation, and the world is moving on, with or without the United States.